NEET Crash Course Biology. So today here in this lecture we will be doing a quick summary of biomolecules and cell cycle and cell division. Now, introduction to biomolecules. All living organisms are made up of certain elements and compounds. When you analyze them, it is found to be mostly built on a background of carbon atoms. Such elements which are built on a background or built on a backbone of carbon molecules, which are found in living organisms extensively, are called biomolecules. All carbon compounds found in living organisms are biomolecules. Of course, you will also find hydrogen and oxygen along with them. So whenever you think of the word biomolecules, you have to associate it with living organisms. Okay? The collection or the sum total of different types of biomolecules or compounds present in a cell is referred to as a cellular pool. So you have learnt that the biomolecules may be of two types, biomicromolecules and biomacromolecules, based on their molecular weight. So what is a biomicromolecule and what is a biomacromolecule? Now let me just give you a quick explanation. Now if you say biomolecule is micro versus macro, a micromolecule has a molecular weight of somewhere between 18 to 800 Dalton, or you can say it is less than 1000 Dalton. Whereas a macromolecule has 10,000 or more Dalton molecular weight. So micro means they are small molecules, they are smaller in their molecular weight, and macro means they are massive molecules, they are larger in their molecular weight. Most of the macromolecules are polymeric, not all, but most of them are polymeric. Now what do you mean by polymeric? Polymeric means, for example, if I consider a beaded chain like this. Now this entire beaded chain becomes a polymer because it is made up of many individual units which are bonded together, and each individual unit is referred to as a monomer. So most of the macromolecules are monomeric units. They represent the individual bead-like structures, whereas all the beads which are connected to each other by chemical bonds make up a polymer, so which can be a macromolecule. So generally a biomicromolecule is smaller in weight, it is smaller in molecular weight, and a biomacromolecule is larger in case of molecular weight. Now we will discuss about both biomicro and biomacromolecules. Now if you remember your basics which you had learnt in your PU, you can separate the biomicromolecules from biomacromolecules. Now generally when you analyze the organic constituents of a cell, you will find all these micromolecules in a fraction. You take a living tissue and if you analyze the organic substance, you get a fraction called acid soluble pool. The acid soluble pool is mostly rich in micromolecules, and you will get another pool that is called the acid insoluble pool. The acid insoluble pool is basically made up of these complex macromolecules which are very, very larger in size. Now my question for all of you is, in order to obtain acid soluble pool and acid insoluble pool, you need a living tissue. Say for example, you need a part of a vegetable, a plant tissue, or you need a liver tissue, which is an animal tissue. You need to grind that tissue to make a fine paste or a slurry. Now my question is, which is the acid that you will use here in order to make the slurry from the living tissue? When you make a slurry and filter it using a filter paper, then you will get two pools. One is called acid soluble pool, which gets collected in the beaker, and acid insoluble pool, which remains in the funnel in the filter that you filtered the slurry with. Okay, so find out which is the acid that is used in grinding the living tissue in order to obtain a slurry, followed by which you will filter it. Now imagine this is the beaker in which you are filtering the tissue. You have used a funnel and this is the filter. So whatever gets collected in the filter, that means it is massive in size, it cannot pass through. So that is what is referred to as the acid insoluble pool. And whatever gets collected in the beaker, that means it could cross the filter. And when it crosses the filter, we call that pool as the acid soluble pool. The acid soluble pool is also called a filtrate, and acid insoluble pool which gets collected in the filter which does not pass through the filter is referred to as the retentate. Okay, another question is, you will find lipids in the retentate. Now I want you to think about this question as well. You will mostly find lipids in the retentate. However, lipids are not strictly biomacromolecules. If they are not strictly biomacromolecules, that means they must have a smaller size. They have a size of 18 to 800 Daltons. Then why did they get caught in the filter? Why didn't they pass through the filter? So this is another question which I want you to find out. Lipids, even though they are not strictly biomacromolecules, even though they have a molecular weight ranging less than 1000 Dalton, that is 18 to 800 Dalton, why did they get trapped in the filter? Even though, now basically because they get trapped in the filter, we call them as acid insoluble pool. And so they classify as a macromolecule, but in reality they are not strictly macromolecules. So now little one by one, let us go through discussing some of the important biomolecules. We'll start off with a micromolecule called amino acid. Now in amino acid, please remember, again I'm going to show you here, imagine there is a beaded chain. This entire beaded chain is referred to as a protein or a polypeptide chain, and the individual bead which makes up the protein is referred to as the amino acid. So which is a polymer and which is a monomer? Protein is a polymer and amino acid is a monomer. As the name indicates, amino acids contain both amino group, NH2 amine group, as well as an acid group. That's why they are called amino acids. We can consider amino acid as a substituted methane. Now why do we call it as a substituted methane? Because methane has 4 hydrogen atoms attached to the central carbon. Now here what you do is you retain one of the hydrogen. In amino acids they have 1 hydrogen, one of them is replaced by an R group, one of them is replaced by an amine group, and one of them is replaced by a COOH or an acid group. So it's as if you are substituting the first hydrogen, the second hydrogen, and the third hydrogen, and you are keeping only 1 hydrogen in the methane molecule. That's why we call amino acid as substituted methane. See the structure here. So this R group is something that varies from one amino acid to another. So we call it as variable group. For example, in this example, an amino acid called glycine. Surprisingly, in amino acid glycine, the R group is also a hydrogen atom. That means it has 2 hydrogen atoms. It is the simplest amino acid. We can call glycine as simplest amino acid. Now in alanine you can see how the R group is a different one, it is CH2. In serine you can see how it is CH2OH, that is hydroxymethyl group. So it may be a hydrogen, it may be a methyl group, or it may be a hydroxymethyl group. So what is differing from one amino acid to the next amino acid? The R group is differing from one amino acid to the other. Now we shall move on to lipids. So that was about amino acids, okay, and I told you a chain of amino acids become what is referred to as a protein molecule. And one more thing, one important thing which I forgot to mention here was, I told you that this is a beaded chain. Yes or no? Now this particular subunit in the beaded chain is referred to as the amino acid. And this bond which connects the 2 amino acids together is called the peptide or amide linkage. So all of you remember, and its chemical constitution is C double bond O N single bond H. So it's called the CONH bond. And this CONH bond which connects amino acid 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6 and so on, and it forms a polypeptide chain. This bond which holds the amino acids together in a polymer is referred to as a peptide bond. Now lipids are water insoluble and they are present both in plants and animals. They contain carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. However, the number of oxygen atoms is very less in comparison to carbohydrates that we will be discussing. Lipids could be classified into simple lipids and derived lipids. Now all of you remember we can classify them as simple lipids, compound lipids actually. Yeah, here there's a second one. So simple lipid, compound lipid and derived lipid. Now let us focus first on simple lipid. It includes fatty acids and glycerol. Now what is a glycerol? A glycerol molecule is an alcohol. It is a trihydric alcohol. So if you say that this is a glycerol molecule, attached to the glycerol molecule generally you will find 3 molecules of fatty acid. So fatty acid 1, fatty acid 2 and fatty acid 3. And what is a fatty acid molecule made up of? A fatty acid molecule has a R or the variable group and an acid group. And this R may be as simple as a methyl methane group, or it may be an ethyl group, or it may be a very long hydrocarbon chain, a very long chain of carbon atoms. So a fatty acid is basically consisting of, this is the empirical formula of fatty acid, RCOOH. And a glycerol is nothing but a 3-carbon compound. It is also called a trihydroxypropane. So the chemical name of glycerol is trihydroxypropane. Okay, so glycerol is usually attached to, and this bond which I am showing here, the connection between the glycerol molecule and the fatty acid molecule is referred to as an ester linkage. That's why we say fatty acids and glycerol, lipids are, simple lipids are esters of glycerol and fatty acid, because the bond between the fatty acid and the glycerol molecule is what? It is a ester bond. And the formula for glycerol is CH2OH, CHOH, CH2OH. So totally glycerol has 1, 2, 3. That's why it's called a propane. And notice that the glycerol molecule has 3 OH groups, and this OH group reacts with the carboxylic acid group of the fatty acid to form a linkage that is so remember, when ester bond is formed, it involves the OH group of the glycerol molecule and it involves the COOH group of the fatty acid. So both of them react together to form these bonds which I am highlighting here. These bonds are referred to as ester linkage. So we can call such a molecule, please note all of you, there is one glycerol molecule and how many fatty acid molecule? 3 fatty acid molecule. So these are called simple lipids, and to be very specific, they are called neutral fats. To be even more specific, we can call them as triglycerides. So triglycerides are nothing but lipid molecules which are built on an alcoholic group, a trihydroxypropane or a trihydric alcohol, because it has 3 OH groups which is called glycerol. The glycerol of one molecule is linked with 3 molecules of fatty acids where at the hydroxyl groups respectively to form an ester bond. One glycerol and 3 fatty acids is called what? A triglyceride. It is also referred to as a neutral fat. So I told you the empirical formula of a fatty acid, that is nothing but R group, there is an R group and there is a COOH group. I told you that this is the simple formula of a fatty acid, where this R group may be, it may be a methyl group, it may be an ethyl group C2H5, or it may be a very long carbon compound or a carbon chain with lot of carbon and hydrogen near it, hydrocarbon chain. Okay, then see, it could be a methyl, it could be an ethyl, or a higher number of CH2 groups can be there. About 1 to 9 carbon atoms can be found in this group. Did you understand? So what can we classify these fatty acids into? We can classify them into saturated fatty acid and unsaturated fatty acid. Now this classification, as you all are aware, is based on the R group. If the R group has only carbon to carbon single bonds, then we call it as saturated fatty acid. So based on R group, a fatty acid may be saturated, or if the R group has carbon to carbon double bond or carbon to carbon triple bond, even a single carbon to carbon double bond or carbon to carbon triple bond, we call such a fatty acid as unsaturated. So remember, the two types of fatty acids are saturated and unsaturated. Palmitic acid is an example for saturated fatty acid. It has a total of 16 carbon atoms, including the COOH. So you can say the formula of palmitic acid is CH3CH2 14 times COOH. Now which is the R group over here? Obviously the CH3 and CH2 is the R group, and you can see that there is an acid group. Let us count the number of carbon atoms. This is CH2 brackets 14. So 14 plus 115 plus 1 carbon, that is 16 carbon atoms. Similarly, there is an unsaturated fatty acid that is called arachidonic acid. Palmitic acid is saturated because the R group has carbon to carbon single bond. Arachidonic acid is unsaturated because the R group has at least one carbon to carbon double bond in this case. And in arachidonic acid there are totally 20 carbon atoms. In palmitic acid, like I gave you the formula, it is CH3CH2 14 times COOH. Okay, so it is an example for saturated. So on what basis are we classifying it into saturated and unsaturated? Based on R group, whether the R group has a carbon to carbon single bond or carbon to carbon double bond. So fatty acids is a relatively simple concept because they just have a very simple formula, RCOOH. That's why they are called acids. Okay, I told you if there are carbon to carbon single bonds, then we call it as what? Saturated fatty acid. If there are double or triple bonds between the carbon atoms, then we call it as unsaturated fatty acids. Correct? So now let us see what is the basic difference between saturated and unsaturated. In saturated there is no double bond. In unsaturated there is one or more double bond. All the carbons are fully saturated, unsaturated. Most of the animal fats are saturated, whereas plant fats, we call these as oils. Okay, now oils and fats, I told you in the beginning there was something, I discussed something with you called triglycerides. What was a triglyceride? Can you recall and tell me? A triglyceride was a simple lipid. What was a triglyceride made up of? It had a glycerol molecule and it had what attached to it? Fatty acids. Three same fatty acids or three different fatty acids were attached. Now these triglycerides are of two types depending on whether the fatty acids are saturated or not, that is fats and oils. Fats are solid at room temperature, and if there is a fat, it has a glycerol and a fatty acid just like how you saw in a triglyceride, but all the fatty acids are saturated. In oils, all the fatty acids are unsaturated. So actually fats and oils are a type of triglycerides. And what is a triglyceride? The name only indicates. Tri means three molecules of fatty acids linked to a glycerol molecule. So when will you call it a fat? When these fatty acids are saturated, like it is in the case of butter and ghee, animal fats. And when will you call it oil? When these fatty acids are unsaturated, like for example you have gingerly oil, which is a plant source. So basically fats and oils are, fats are saturated and oils are unsaturated. Fats or saturated fatty acids are solid at room temperature. These are liquid at room temperature. Essential fatty acids are absent in saturated fats. In unsaturated fats, mostly you have lot of essential fat. That's why we say plant oils are more healthier than animal fats, because plant oils are wholesome. They contain lot of essential fatty acids. Essential fatty acids means you cannot derive them from the diet. You have to synthesize them in your body cells. Saturated fatty acids have a very high melting point, that's why they are solid at room temperature. Unsaturated fatty acids are they have a low melting point, that's why they are basically liquid at room temperature. Example for saturated fatty acids are stearic acid and lauric acid. Linoleic acid and oleic acid are some of the examples for unsaturated fatty acids. There are certain unsaturated fatty acids which not only have one carbon to carbon double bond, but they have more than one carbon to carbon double bond. Okay, so more than one carbon to carbon double bond, if you see, then it is referred to as PUFA, that is polyunsaturated fatty acid. If it has only one carbon to carbon double bond, then we call it as monounsaturated fatty acid. But in this case, it is called polyunsaturated fatty acids, that is more than one carbon to carbon double bond, like in the case of sunflower, safflower, that is used in safflower oil, isn't it? So these oils are healthier because they have this healthy type of unsaturated fats, which is referred to as polyunsaturated fatty acids. Okay, I already discussed about the glycerol molecule. It is called trihydroxypropane or trihydric alcohol because it has 3 carbon atoms and it has 3 OH groups, isn't it? So CH2OH, then we have CHOH, then we have CH2OH. This glycerol has to form a bond with 3 fatty acids, say R1COOH, R2COOH, R3COOH. Now how is an ester bond is formed? By removal of water molecule. So the H of this hydroxyl group, alcoholic group, will react with the OH of this COOH group in the fatty acid. Remember, this is glycerol and these are fatty acids. Yes or no? And then the H will combine with OH here. The H will react with OH and it is dehydration synthesis. There is loss in the form of water molecule, and when all of them lose their water molecule, there will be an ester bond. What is that ester bond? Let us see how it looks. So CH2O, C double bond O, R1, then CHO, C double bond O, R2, then CH2O, C double bond O, R3. See this ester bond, carbon to oxygen bond. This is called the ester bond. So the OH group of the glycerol will react with the COOH group of the acid, resulting in the loss of water molecule, and this molecule now, which has one glycerol and 3 fatty acids, what do you call this molecule? It is now called a triglyceride. And we already discussed the 2 types of triglyceride. One was fats, which are rich in saturated fatty acids, and oils, which are rich in unsaturated fatty acids. So it is something to make you understand easily. Let me write triglyceride here. Okay, now triglyceride here, let you know that there is a glycerol molecule in a triglyceride and there are 1, 2, 3 fatty acids. So if it is a fat, then there is a glycerol molecule with 1, 2 and 3. All the 3 fatty acids have only carbon to carbon single bond, meaning they are saturated. If it is oil, they will have a glycerol molecule which is linked to fatty acid, 3 molecules of fatty acids, where the fatty acids may have carbon to carbon double bond. So they are unsaturated. Simple lipids, what we kept talking now, oils and fats, and there is another type of lipid called waxes. See, in oils and fats, which was the alcohol that combined with fatty acid? It was glycerol. But in waxes, what happens? There is a different alcohol. So here what happens? There is a fatty acid. Just like even in the case of oils and fats, there is a fatty acid, but it is combined with a different alcohol, not a glycerol. We call it as a long chain alcohol. Okay, so this is how a wax is different from a triglyceride. In a wax, you have fatty acid which is connected not to glycerol molecule. Generally, we kept saying the alcohol that is found in fats is glycerol molecule. But in this case, instead of glycerol, there is a long chain alcohol. Let me give you the example of beeswax. In beeswax, the fatty acid is palmitic acid, saturated fatty acid. Palmitic acid is bonded to an alcohol, and this alcohol is called the myricyl alcohol. And the formula of myricyl alcohol is C30H61OH. Okay, so basically you have a myricyl alcohol in this case, which is connected to a palmitic acid. So how is a wax different? Wax does not have glycerol molecule. Instead of glycerol, they have a different alcohol which is referred to as what? Long chain alcohols. Like for example, in beeswax, the fatty acid is palmitic acid, but the alcohol is myricyl alcohol. So these come under simple lipids. Okay. Conjugated lipid, for example, you have phospholipid. In conjugated lipid, what happens is, I will draw a rough skeletal structure here. There is a glycerol molecule. Glycerol is the alcohol, principal alcohol of lipids. There is a fatty acid 1. There is a second fatty acid 2, but the third fatty acid is not there. Instead, it is replaced by a phosphate group, and there is an additional compound or an additional group. So this is referred to as a phospholipid. See the difference? It has glycerol molecule. Usually a glycerol is attached to, it is bonded to 3 fatty acid molecules. But here it has only how many fatty acid molecule? 2 fatty acid molecule. The third carbon of the glycerol is bonded to a phosphate group, and then it has an additional component. This is what is referred to as phospholipid. The best example for phospholipid is lecithin. Lecithin is called phosphatidyl choline or choline. Okay, so let us see what is there in phosphatidyl choline. There is a glycerol molecule, correct? Then it has fatty acid 1, it has fatty acid 2, but instead of the third fatty acid, there is a phosphate group which is attached to a phosphoryl choline, a choline group. What is choline group? CH2, N, 3 times CH3. So this additional group, in case of here in phospholipid called lecithin, the additional group is choline. So this is referred to as a phospholipid. Phospholipids are extensively found in cell membrane. For example, lecithin is also found in yeast. It is found in soya. It is found in neural and glandular tissue. And of course, it is found in all biomembranes. Okay, then derived lipids. Derived lipids include sphingolipids. Now actually sphingolipids are not derived lipids. Sphingolipids is wrongly placed here. It also comes under compound lipids. Now what is sphingolipid? Let me show you here in a simple skeletal diagram like I have been showing. In sphingolipid, what happens is, there is a fatty acid as usual, but instead of glycerol, there is a new alcohol that is called sphingosine. Sphingosine alcohol is connected to a fatty acid. Such a molecule which does not have glycerol, but instead of glycerol it has another alcohol called amino alcohol or sphingosine, is referred to as sphingolipid. Sphingolipids are nothing but compound lipids again. They are bound to a fatty acid, and this complex which is formed by the sphingosine, which is an amino alcohol. So let me write here. It is an alcohol that is different from glycerol. This amino alcohol and fatty acid combination is called a ceramide. Did you understand? It is called a ceramide. Now in sphingolipids there is a major class that you should all know. It is called the sphingomyelin, which is present in the myelin sheath of neurons. Now in sphingomyelin, what do you see? Obviously you will find the alcohol. The alcohol, like I told you, what did we call its name? We called it sphingosine or amino alcohol. And then there will be a fatty acid molecule. But here in sphingomyelin, there will be an additional group attached to the sphingosine. In this case, the additional group is phosphorylcholine. Did you understand? So this kind of a molecule which has a sphingosine or an alcohol, which is amino alcohol on one side, it has fatty acid on the other side, and an additional group called phosphorylcholine. That means it has ceramide plus phosphorylcholine. Why am I using the word ceramide? Because the combination of sphingosine and fatty acid is referred to as ceramide. So in other ways, you can also write sphingomyelin is ceramide plus phosphorylcholine. Okay, now moving on to derived lipids. In derived lipids we have steroids, then we have sterols and prostaglandins. Steroids are basically those which are built on a multi-ringed compound, and these steroids are used in manufacturing synthesis of some of the hormones in our body like testosterone, estrogen and progesterone. A steroid with an alcoholic group, a OH group, is referred to as a sterol. The most famous sterol is cholesterol. Cholesterol is a component of membrane, cell membrane, and it is also used in a derivative of cholesterol is present in our skin, and when we expose our skin to sunlight, the UVB rays will help in the synthesis of the sunshine vitamin that is called vitamin D. Cholesterol is also the precursor for the synthesis of some of the hormones that we discussed under the steroid section. It is also used in the synthesis of bile acids. Okay, there are certain local hormones found in most tissues which are steroid derivatives. They are referred to as prostaglandins. There is one more steroid like compound that is derived from a yam plant, and it is called the diosgenin. And this diosgenin, that is a steroid like compound or a steroid like structure that is extracted from the yam plant, is used as an anti-fertility pill. So all these compounds which have lipid-like properties are referred to as the derived lipids. Although if you take steroids, they don't have glycerol, they don't have fatty acid, but they are known to exhibit lipid-like properties. That's why steroids, sterols, prostaglandin and steroids like diosgenin are all included under derived lipids. Okay. Now moving on to protein, we had already discussed that a protein is a polypeptide. That means it is a beaded chain. And what do the individual beads represent? You should tell me now. The beads represent what? The bonds between represent what? The entire chain represents a polymer that is referred to as a polypeptide chain. Okay? Proteins can be classified into simple proteins. Simple proteins means they only have amino acids in them. They are not contaminated. Contaminated not in that sense. Contaminate means other than amino acid you will not find anything else. For example, you have albumin, globulin. Albumin is found in egg, globulin is found in our blood, immunoglobulin or antibody. Some plant globulins are also found in pea, like legumin of pea. Histones, which are found associated with our DNA. Actins, actin and myosin, which is found in our muscle cell. Glutelin, which is found in rice and wheat. All these are example for simple proteins because they are exclusively composed of amino acids. Globulins are bigger than albumin, like I told you, and they are insoluble in water but soluble in salt solution. Whenever you think of globulin, you have to first remember the immunoglobulin that provides immunity to us. Histones, like I told you, are associated with our DNA, and actins help in muscle contraction. Classification of proteins: we have myosin, which is a contractile protein, and we have these are all structural proteins basically because they are components of some or the other structure in a cell, so we call them as structural protein. We have keratins, which make up our skin, and also several structures like horns, hooves, hair, feather and nails. And like I told you, glutelin, which is found in rice and wheat, is also a part of the structure of the wheat grain, and therefore it is put under structural protein. Conjugated protein are proteins which on hydrolysis yield amino acids and a non-protein group, which is referred to as a prosthetic group. That means other than amino acid, they have additional groups in them. For example, if you say chromoproteins, they have pigment molecules. Glycoproteins, protein which is combined with carbohydrate molecule. So chromoprotein, glycoprotein, these are examples of conjugated proteins. Phosphoprotein is a protein which is in combination with phosphorus. For example, you have casein. Lipoprotein is in combination with lipids. For example, lipovitellin. And even another example for lipoprotein is chylomicron, that is formed inside the intestinal cells. Phosphoprotein are proteins which have phosphorus in them, like I told you. Another example for phosphoprotein is the same protein which has lipids in it, that is lipovitellin plus phosphitine. Phosphitine is nothing but a phosphoprotein along with lipovitellin, and both of these phosphoproteins are found in the eggs. Now moving on to carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have lot of OH groups, that's why they are called carbohydrates. The general formula of carbohydrate is CnH2ON. These are called saccharides, they are called sugars. And you know that they have individual units, like I keep telling for proteins. If you imagine the carbohydrate is a structure that is made up like this of a beaded chain, then we should say that these individual beads are referred to as the sugars, or these are referred to as the saccharon. Okay, and this entire chain is referred to as a polymer. So a monosaccharide, this sugar which makes up the polymer, is also referred to as a monosaccharide. So monosaccharide is an individual bead, so it is the simplest unit. This bead is the simplest unit. If there are two beads together, it is a disaccharide. If there are 2 to 9 beads together, then there are oligosaccharide. If there are more than 10 beads which are present in a polymer, then we call these carbohydrates as polysaccharide. So on what basis have we classified this? On the basis of complexity of molecule. Some of the monosaccharide units, I told you monosaccharide is one single bead. If you consider a carbohydrate molecule that is a beaded chain like this, then one single bead is referred to as a monosaccharide, and this monosaccharide is classified depending on the number of carbon atoms into triosis, example glyceraldehyde and dihydroxyacetone; tetrosis, example threose and erythrose; pentosis, example ribose, arabinose, lyxose and xylose. So basically all of you remember the classification is based on the number of carbon atoms. And then we have hexose and heptose. Again we are talking about the individual beaded structure. This individual beaded structure is referred to as a monosaccharide. isn't it? And this monosaccharide, if it has 6 carbon atoms, it is a hexose. If it has 7 carbon atoms, it is referred to as heptose. Among these, pentoses and hexoses are very common in biological system. The most famous carbohydrates like glucose, which is the grape sugar, fructose, which is the fruit sugar, mannose and galactose are all belonging to hexose category. That means they are individual beaded structures, not literally a bead. This is only for you to understand. They are individual units of carbohydrate which have 6 carbon atoms in them. So when I say that they are beaded structure, you have to remember that they are the simplest units of carbohydrates. Okay. Monosaccharides have two important properties. One is sugars can reduce Cu2 plus cupric to Cu plus, giving a brick red precipitate, and they are capable of reducing because sugars have a free aldehyde group, that is a C double bond O H group, or they have a C double bond O ketone group. Such carbohydrates, such monosaccharides which can reduce Cu2 plus to Cu plus are called reducing sugars. Okay. See some of the examples here. This 5-ringed structure, this structure is referred to as a pyranose structure or a pyran ring, and this pentagonal structure, the 6-ringed structure is a pyran ring, and the pentagonal structure is referred to as a furan ring. You can see fructose, ribose and deoxyribose exhibit a furanose structure, glucose and galactose exhibit a pyranose structure. Oligosaccharides, like I told you, they have 2 to 9 usually monosaccharide units, correct? And then the best example for oligosaccharides, we are going to focus on disaccharides, those which have 2 sugar units, 2 monomer units which are connected together by a bond. Did you think and remember what is this bond which connects the carbohydrate units together? It is referred to as a glycosidic bond. So please remember these glycosidic bonds which connect the 2 sugar units together. The best example for disaccharide is maltose, which has 2 molecules of glucose. Lactose has 1 molecule of glucose and 1 molecule of galactose. And sucrose has, it's mentioned over here, sucrose has 1 molecule of glucose and 1 molecule of fructose. Polysaccharides, these are complex carbohydrates. They are called polyglycans. Polysaccharides have more than 9, that is more than 10 sugar units. I told you that they have n number of beaded structures. Each beaded structure is a monosaccharide, and depending on whether the beads are the same or not, we can classify them as homopolysaccharide or heteropolysaccharide. Homopolysaccharide or heteropolysaccharide is all the beads are alike. The beads that are making up a polysaccharide, all of them are alike. Okay, now in this particular case, you can take the example of starch. Examples for homopolysaccharide are starch, glycogen, cellulose. Please read through your NCERT book, you will remember all the details. Inulin is a polymer of starch. So these are some of the examples for homopolysaccharide. Now imagine that each sugar unit that makes up this polysaccharide is different, or it is a mix of 2. Say for example, it is of A type, B type. Again A, B. A type sugar, B type. Then we call it as a heteropolysaccharide. Some of the examples for heteropolysaccharide include agar, then there is pectin, and I forgot to include chitin is also a homopolysaccharide. N-acetyl glucosamine is repeated in case of chitin. Pectin, and then we have so many other examples. We have a group which is called mucopolysaccharide. In that we have hyaluronic acid. All this you need to revise. Then we have heparin. Then we have keratin sulfate. Then we have chondroitin sulfate. So all these have a mix of 2 sugar units in them. So we call them as heteropolysaccharide. In agar there are 2 components. One is called agarobiose and agaropectin. So please bear in mind. Okay. Bonds we have already discussed. In proteins, the bond is a peptide bond. In carbohydrates, the bond is a glycosidic bond which connects the two sugar units. In nucleic acid, there is a bond which is called phosphodiester bond. But let us now discuss about nucleic acid. Just like in carbohydrates and proteins, if you imagine a chain of beaded structures, now these beaded structures, this entire bead is referred to as a nucleic acid. If you were to take one bead, then we call it as a nucleotide. And the bond which connects the nucleotides together is referred to as a phosphodiester bond. Okay, so nucleotides are put together. We call this a nucleotide, or we can also call it as a polynucleotide chain. And what is a nucleotide made up of? It is made up of a pentose sugar, meaning a sugar with 5 carbon atom. It is made up of nitrogen bases, and it is made up of a phosphate group. Isn't it? So sugar and phosphate and nitrogen group. And another important thing is, if you were to consider the beaded chain slightly differently, so let me do it here, let me write it here: sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, so on. So SP, SP, SP. So the main backbone of the beaded chain has sugar and phosphate. Then you may ask, where is nitrogen base? The nitrogen base are disposed at right angles to the sugar molecule. So now don't you think you have S, N and P? S, N and P together make up one nucleotide. Isn't it? So we have, so this is one nucleotide, this is one set of nucleotide, this is the second set of nucleotide, this is the third set of nucleotide. How are they all connected? They are connected by phosphodiester bond. So nitrogen bases, please remember there are two classes of nitrogen bases called purines and pyrimidines. Adenine and guanine are called purines. All of you remember these are ringed compounds. Purines have heterogeneous rings, 2 rings, and pyrimidines have a single ring. So 2 types of nitrogen bases which usually are found in nucleic acids. Purines include adenine and guanine, and pyrimidines include cytosine and thymine. Now since we are talking about the DNA, in DNA you have 2 such polynucleotide chains which are helically coiled with each other, and they have a pairing between adenine and thymine. As you know, adenine pairs with thymine with 2 hydrogen bonds, guanine pairs with cytosine with 3 hydrogen bonds. That's why since the DNA molecule has 2 polynucleotide chain, we call the DNA molecule as what? We call it as a double-stranded structure. So see, it's as if you have 2 chains. Let me show here: sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. It goes on. Now the sugar is corresponding to the sugar in the next chain: phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, and so on. So S, P, S, P, S, P. Here also S, P, S, P, S and P. Now where is the nitrogen base? Nitrogen base is at right angles to the sugar. Now see how it looks like a ladder. DNA looks like a ladder like structure here, yes or no? So the nitrogen base on one side, if it is adenine, the corresponding one will be thymine with 2 hydrogen bonds. They will bind together. The guanine on one side, it will be cytosine with 3 hydrogen bonds. Similarly, if there is cytosine here, it will be guanine 3 hydrogen bonds. So can you see? And this bond that is connecting one nucleotide with another, which is mediated by a phosphate, is called, what is it called? Phosphodiester bond. So this is your DNA molecule. Now you may ask a question: does the DNA have a ladder like appearance like this? No. You take this ladder and you twist it, you will get a spiral staircase like structure. That is what is your DNA double helix model. Now let us see if all the components are visible to us. Now how many polynucleotide chain? This is one chain, one polynucleotide chain, and this is the second polynucleotide chain. That's why we say DNA is what? DNA is double stranded. isn't it? It is double stranded in nature, and you can see that it has two chains. Each chain has a backbone of what? Sugar, phosphate. And does each chain have a repeating unit which is referred to as a nucleotide? Yes. There is a sugar, there is a phosphate, there is a nitrogen base. What is this one unit called? This one unit is called a nucleotide. So there are several nucleotides connected together by what bond? Phosphodiester. How is one nucleotide of one chain connected to the next nucleotide, corresponding nucleotide of the next chain? By means of the nitrogen base pairing. Base pairing rule says adenine pairs with thymine with 2 hydrogen bonds, guanine pairs with cytosine with 3 hydrogen bonds. Concept of metabolism. You know about anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism, the best example is photosynthesis, where it is a build-up process, and catabolism is a breakdown process. Anabolism requires you need to feed energy in the form of ATP for most of the anabolic procedures, but for catabolism we get energy out of it, so in the form of ATP. So we can call anabolic reactions as endergonic because they absorb energy, and we can call catabolic reactions as exergonic because they give out energy. Okay, anabolic is a constructive process, it is a build up process. Catabolic is a destructive process as opposed to anabolism. That's why catabolism results in a lot of energy release in the form of ATP. Enzymes, as you all know, are biocatalysts. They are capable of speeding or quickening a chemical reaction. For example, you have a reactant A that needs to get converted to product B. If enzyme is present, then A will get converted to B very quickly. Now that's why we call enzymes which are restricted to biological tissue as biocatalysts. Okay, an enzyme is a protein which is mostly in its functioning form. It should exhibit a tertiary structure. Most of the enzymes are proteins. That means they have a thread, a beaded chain which is made up of amino acids, and this thread gets coiled around itself to form a structure called a tertiary structure which resembles a hollow woolen ball. But can you think of an enzyme which is not a protein? Most of them are protein, but there is an enzyme which is called ribozyme. Ribozyme is an enzyme found in ribosome, and it is nothing but a catalytic RNA. It is an RNA which can function as an enzyme. But majority of the enzyme, like I told you, are proteins. They have beaded chain. By now you know what are the beads on the protein? Amino acids, isn't it? And the thread is not present like this. The thread is coiled into a hollow woolen ball like structure, and when the thread coils itself into a hollow woolen ball like structure, we call this organization as tertiary structure. For an enzyme to remain biologically active, it must exist in its tertiary structure. Okay, then if you imagine this is the protein thread that makes up the enzyme, and say it has coiled itself like this into a hollow woolen ball. Okay, now if you were to draw the outline of the enzyme, you can see I have shown a deep pocket or a cleft over here. This pocket or a crevice or a cleft is referred to as the active site. So in every enzyme you will find an active site. Now what comes and binds over there? The substrate will come and bind over there, the reactant. When the substrate goes and binds over there, it gets converted into what? It gets converted into, so usually we use the word substrate for a reactant here. It goes and binds to the active site, and finally it gets converted into a suitable product. Did you understand? So enzymes are mostly protein threads. How are the protein threads coiled? Into tertiary structure. While they coil, they usually form crevices or pockets like this. And what do you call such a crevice or a pocket? It is referred to as active site. Okay. Then sometimes if this is an enzyme, let me just represent this enzyme as a very simple structure like this. Sometimes an enzyme requires an additional compound which is attached to it in order to do its function normally. We call this as a conjugate enzyme. Okay, now this protein part of the enzyme is referred to as the apoenzyme. and generally this additional substance that needs to bind to an enzyme to help the enzyme form to catalyze the reaction, we call this as either it may be a coenzyme if it is organic in nature, or it may be a metal ion if it is a metal ion, or it may be a substance called prosthetic group. Prosthetic group is very tightly bound to the enzyme. So basically this entire complex of, this is the enzyme which is the protein part called apoenzyme, and this is the part which may either be a prosthetic group or a coenzyme or a metal ion. This entire complex of enzyme along with coenzyme or prosthetic group of metal ion is referred to as a holoenzyme complex. Now what is this cleft you can see here? This cleft is what I was telling you. This is where the substrate binds, and this cleft is referred to as the active site. And what will happen if you remove this coenzyme? If you remove the coenzyme or the cofactor if it is inorganic, or if it is a structure which is very tightly bound, if you remove it, then the enzyme will become non-functional. This tells us that this additional compound, non-protein compound that is attached to the enzyme is very much required for an enzyme to form its to catalyze a particular reaction. Nature of enzyme. See how an enzyme goes and binds to the substrate molecule. A complex is formed called enzyme substrate complex. Very soon the enzyme will, after binding to the substrate, it will bring about certain chemical changes in the substrate, and the substrate gets converted into a product in the enzyme product complex, and finally the product is liberated. So you have enzyme plus free product, and the enzyme can be recycled. It is once again available to carry out the same reaction. That means the enzyme is unchanged. Okay. Catalytic site of, or catalytic cycle of an enzyme. So first we have an enzyme with an active site, and let us say this is the substrate. Notice the substrate has a sharp edge and the active site is blunt. So it is not like the substrate goes and fits into the enzyme active site like lock and key. No. So first what happens is this enzyme will now, the substrate will go and bind to the active site of the enzyme. See? And then the substrate will bring about changes in the active site of the enzyme such that the enzyme can fit tightly around the substrate. Now see how the active site will change. The active site will conform to the shape of the substrate. See, both have sharp edges now. Here the active site was blunt, but now the substrate, on going and binding to the enzyme, it has mediated a change such that the enzyme is now tightly bound, wrapped around the subject. Now what happens? The active site, this is the active site of the enzyme, will bring about changes in the substrate molecule. So now ultimately the substrate will become what? The substrate will now become product. Isn't it? It becomes a product because the active site is bringing about changes in it, and then finally the product will be set free. So enzyme substrate complex, enzyme product complex, and finally a free enzyme and a free product, and again the active site of the enzyme will go back to being to its original shape like what we saw over here. This model is called the induced fit model, which explains the process of enzyme action. Activation energy concept. Notice that a substrate, if it has to get converted into a product, a substrate already has a certain amount of energy with it, which we call it as the internal energy. It is a form of potential energy. Isn't it? Now what happens is the substrate cannot directly become the product. Let us take the first path. The substrate needs to be pushed to a higher energy state. This higher energy state is called transition state. The extra energy that you need to give to the substrate to push it to this higher energy state is called activation energy. Now here, without the enzyme, the substrate is being very stubborn. It is asking for too much energy. But notice here, in the presence of enzyme, very quickly the substrate reaches the higher energy state. So it is asking for a lesser push. Why is it asking for lesser activation energy? Because there is enzyme with it. So when enzyme is not there, the substrate wants a greater push to reach the peak, which is called transition state. When this enzyme is there, the substrate needs a lesser push to reach the peak, that is called transition state. And only if the substrate reaches the transition state, only then can it ultimately get converted into a suitable product. So now tell me, what is the advantage of the enzyme? The enzyme will make sure that the substrate is demanding less activation energy, but if the enzyme is not there, then the activation energy that is demanded by the substrate will be more. What is activation energy? From the basal energy state to the higher energy state. What is this higher energy state called? It is called transition state. The push that is required, the input that is required for the substrate to reach the higher energy state is called activation energy. So enzyme lowers the demand for activation energy by whom? By the substrate. The substrate will become less cranky in the presence of enzyme. It will make do with less amount of activation energy. But if the enzyme is not there, the substrate is very stubborn. It needs an additional push. It needs a greater energy. That's why it takes this upper path. Obviously, if it takes the upper graph, see how long it will take for the substrate to reach this peak level, and then all the way it has to become the product. Isn't it more time consuming? But if there is enzyme, very quickly it will reach the transition state and very quickly it gets converted to product. So this push is activation energy, lesser push in the presence of enzyme, a greater push in the absence of enzyme. Okay? Factors affecting enzyme activity. Here you are gradually increasing the substrate concentration. You are keeping the concentration of the enzyme constant. As you increase the substrate concentration, the rate of the enzyme, the velocity, the speed of the reaction will keep increasing. That means substrates are getting converted to products. But notice, beyond a certain point, no matter how much you increase the substrate concentration, the velocity of the reaction attains a maximum value that is referred to as the Vmax. Can you tell me why? Because the enzymes are constant in number. So if you keep increasing the substrate concentration, there are not enough enzymes to bind to the substrate. Or you can say all the available enzymes have become saturated. Saturated means they are already occupied with substrate. So enzymes are saturated, but you are simply increasing the substrate concentration. So therefore, the graph attains a stationary or a plateau stage, which is referred to as the maximal velocity or Vmax, and the concentration of substrate that is required for us to attain half of Vmax, which is called Vmax by 2. That concentration of substrate is referred to as Km. So how do you define Km? It is the concentration of the substrate required to attain what? Not the maximal velocity, required to attain half of the. That means if there are 100 enzymes, 50 of them are filled up at Km, because Km means how many substrates you need to make sure that 50 out of 100 are filled up or are bound to the substrate. So as an example, I have said that you have taken 100 enzymes. If 50 out of 100 enzymes are bound to the substrate, the concentration of the substrate at this level is referred to as the Km. That means how many substrate molecules you require in the reaction medium, so that how many enzymes get occupied, how many enzymes get bound to the substrate. 50 out of 100, exactly half of them. That is referred to as Km. Why in Vmax there is no further increase? All the 100 enzymes that you had taken have become bound to the substrate molecule. So even if you put 200, 300, 400 substrates, nothing is going to change, because all the 100 have become occupied, have gone, the substrates have gone and sat on all the 100 active sites which are available, and that's why we call this point where there is no further rise in the velocity of the reaction as Vmax. Okay? Nomenclature, please learn this from the NCERT. Oxidoreductases are enzymes which catalyze oxidation reduction reaction. Transferases catalyze transferring of groups from one molecule to another. Hydrolases break the chemical bonds in the presence of water molecule. Lyases break the chemical bond without the help of water molecule. Isomerases can change one isomer to another, and ligases can stitch the atoms together by forming bonds between them. See, bonds are formed between atoms. That's why ligases are called molecular stitches or molecular glues. So this completes the chapter of biomolecules. Now we will do a very short and a very quick recap of cell cycle and cell division. The phases of cell cycle, as you are all aware, it includes what is referred to as the interphase. Interphase includes G1 or gap 1 phase, S phase or synthetic phase, G2 or gap 2 phase, and the actual phase in which the cell divides is referred to as the M phase. So basically we have interphase and M phase. Interphase is further divided into, what is it further divided into? Into G1, S and G2. Sometimes a cell exits the cell cycle and it gets temporarily arrested in a phase called the quiescent phase, that is G0, when it gets differentiated. For example, so remember this G0 is called the quiescent phase. It is for example, our heart cell has decided not to divide, so it has now temporarily, it becomes suspended in a different group, in a different phase, that is called the G0 or the quiescent phase. Now basically a cell has to prepare itself to divide. All the preparations happen during gap 1 phase, S phase and G2 phase. In gap 1 phase, the cell is metabolically active and grows in size. In S phase, it doubles its DNA and its centriole undergoes duplication in the cytoplasm. DNA undergoes duplication in the nucleus and it prepares for mitosis. It is active again and it synthesizes proteins required for spindle apparatus during the G2 or the gap 2 phase. Our focus is the M phase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, especially if we are talking about mitosis. Okay, so let us quickly go through mitosis. In mitosis, all of you should remember one thing. If this is a chromosome, this is the centromere of the chromosome. A chromosome has how many arms? 4 arms. Now these 2 arms together make up one chromatid. Now many of you make a mistake of saying that this chromosome has 4 chromatids. It is not true. This is called a P arm. This is called a Q arm. P plus Q arm is one chromatid. The duplicate of P and Q arms are called P dash arm and Q dash arm. Q dash and P dash together are a second chromatid. So totally this chromosome has 4 arms. But how many chromatids? 2 chromatids. What are those 2 chromatids? Those 2 chromatids are P plus Q arm is one chromatid plus P dash plus Q dash arm. And this chromosome has how many DNA molecules? If it has 2 chromatids, we say that the chromosome is duplicated. It has 2 DNA molecules. However, if I take a chromosome with a centromere and having only 2 arms, this is a P arm and a Q arm, that means it has how many chromatid? It has only one chromatid. When I say that a chromosome has only one chromatid, that means it has only one DNA molecule. Okay? But how did 1 become 2? All of you remember this chromosome which has only one chromatid, that is P and Q, which is nothing but one DNA molecule. Okay? Or we can say one chromatid will now get transferred into a chromosome which has 2 chromatids. See, P and Q is still there and copies of P and Q called P dash and Q dash are also there now. So this has 2 chromatids and 2 DNA molecules. When did this doubling happen? Here there was only one DNA molecule. Here we have 2 DNA molecule. This happens during which phase of the cell cycle? The synthetic phase of the cell cycle. And what is this constriction called? The constriction is referred to as the centromere. So all of you remember, don't get confused between the arms and the chromatid. Two arms together make up one chromatid, and one chromatid is equal to one DNA molecule. So one chromatid became two chromatids or two DNA during duplication or replication of DNA that takes place in the synthesis phase or the S phase of the cell cycle. Clear to all of you? Okay. Then in prophase, see how the nuclear envelope has disappeared. You can see that the nuclear envelope has disappeared and the centrioles have migrated to they are beginning to migrate to the opposite poles. They have fully migrated towards the opposite poles in metaphase. All the chromosomes, actually the chromosomes become visible in prophase. Initially the chromosomes look like this. They only have thread-like structures. The chromatids are not seen, but later when they start condensing, you can see these rod-like structure. That's why we say chromosomes are rod-like structure. So you can see them condensing during prophase. Now see how all the chromosomes have aligned at the equator in a single line. This is what is called metaphase. And if this is a chromosome that has come to the center, each chromosome will have two chromatids, like I told you, two DNA molecule. On either sides of the centromere, there will be proteinaceous covering called kinetochore. Each kinetochore attaches to the corresponding spindle fiber from the upper pole and from the lower pole. So remember, the spindle fibers are not directly attached to the centromere. The spindle fibers are attached to kinetochore, which is a proteinaceous covering. Now see what is happening in anaphase. I told you that the chromosome gets attached to the spindle fiber. Now notice in anaphase, the centromere is splitting. So what will happen? P and Q will get separated from P dash and Q dash. That means the sister chromatids, we can call these two chromatids as sister chromatids because they are copies of each other. How did the sister chromatids get separated? By the splitting of the centromere. Now this splitting of the centromere resulting in the separation of sister chromatids is what we see in the case of anaphase. And the sister chromatids which migrate to the opposite poles, see how they have again become thread-like. That is, they undergo decondensation. They had appeared to form chromosomes. Now they are again reverting to their thread-like nature, and you can see how the nuclear membrane is reappearing and the centriole is getting segregated, one on the either side. And notice that after the nuclear division, so whatever we discussed until here, it is called nuclear division or karyokinesis. Can you see how the cell is developing a constriction here? And it is, the constriction is growing deeper and deeper. Ultimately it pinches off and we get two daughter cells. What do you call this process where the cytoplasm is dividing? We call it as cytokinesis. In animal cells it happens like this, like how it is depicted in this diagram, by the formation of a constriction. This is called a cleavage or the furrow formation. In plants it happens through a process referred to as cell plate formation. Okay, so please remember, in animals it is cleavage or furrow formation. In plants it is phragmoplast and cell plate formation. Can you think and tell me what will happen if cytokinesis does not take place? Don't you think we will have one massive cell with how many nuclei in it? With two nuclei. Just imagine, every time the nucleus divides, the cytoplasm does not divide. We end up with, what do we end up? We end up with a multinucleate cell because we have one huge cell with many nuclei because the cell is not dividing by cytokinesis. This is referred to as a syncytium. In animals we call it as syncytium. Okay, in plants syncytium, syncytium can be used. A word called syncytium is mostly used in the case of animals. In plants we use a word called cenocyte. Okay, so syncytium or cenocytic condition is where a cell has many nuclei. Why? Because what happened and what did not happen? Karyokinesis kept happening, cytokinesis did not happen. So I hope you understood. The most important questions will be related to metaphase in your NEET exam and anaphase. In metaphase, like I told you, the chromosomes align in a single line in the equator and the centromere is covered with kinetochore which attaches to the spindle fiber on either side. And in anaphase I told you what splits. the centromere here, look here, the centromere splits. P and Q get separated from P dash and Q dash, and here remember, P and Q was one chromatid, P dash and Q dash was the second chromatid. What did we call these two chromatids together? Sister chromatids. The sister chromatids get separated from each other. Meiosis is called reductional division. What we just finished now, mitosis, is called equational division because the daughter cells have the same number of chromosomes as that of the mother cells. But in meiosis, we call it as reductional division because in reductional division, what basically happens is there is a reduction in the number of chromosomes. Meiosis happens in two stages, that is meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. Okay, meiosis 1 has all the four stages: prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1 and telophase 1. Meiosis 2 also has all the four stages. Okay, prophase 1 is the longest phase. It includes subphases called leptotene. See how the chromosomes have begun to appear here. Zygotene, see, two chromosomes are coming together to form a pair, and what do we call this pairing of chromosomes? We call them as synapses. And then during Pachytene, something called crossing over takes place. Now let me show you a pair here. This is one chromosome, very diagrammatic representation. This is another chromosome. Notice both of them have sister chromatids. These two chromatids are referred to as the sister chromatids. But what would you call one chromatid of this chromosome and one chromatid of this chromosome? We would call it non-sister chromatids. And they come together and they form a pair, and they are held together by a protein complex between them called synaptonemal complex. Why do they form a pair? Because they are genetically identical. Such pairs are referred to as homologous pairs of chromosomes. Now in Pachytene, what happens is, notice here all of you carefully, there is overlapping between, see, the non-sister chromatids of the homologous pair will overlap with each other, and this process where overlapping takes place, followed by a cut is formed here, a cut is formed in the respective non-sister chromatids, and they get mutually exchanged. This is referred to as crossing over. This happens during Pachytene. And we also call this paired chromosome as a tetrad. Please remember that also, because why is it called a tetrad or a bivalent? Because if you count, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 chromatids. Tetrad refers to 4 chromatids. So crossing over has happened. They are still very close to each other. Okay. Now in case of diplotene, this phase, which is referred to as diplotene, the fourth phase in prophase 1, the chromosomes will start moving away from each other. When they start moving away from each other, you can actually prominently see the points where crossing over took place. These points where crossing over took place. They become more and more prominent. These X-shaped structures where crossing over took place, they are referred to as chiasmata. And you can see here these bandage-like structures represent the points where crossing over took place. Okay, so they start moving away from each other during diplotene, and chiasmata become very clearly visible during diplotene. And during diakinesis, they are very far away. The last phase is referred to as diakinesis, or it is referred to as terminalization. Notice here they have gone far away from each other such that only the ends of their non-sister chromatids are in contact with each other. You can no longer see the chiasmata, and you can see the bandaged. You can't see the bandaged portions, obviously. These are diagrammatic, and the crossovers can be seen. Notice you will not see any X-shaped structures not seen over here. In diakinesis, you will only see that the ends of the chromatids, the non-sister chromatids, are in contact. So all these events happen during prophase 1. Now after prophase 1, notice how the chromosomes are aligned in the equator along with their pair. I told you they form a pair called homologous chromosomes or tetrad. They are coming to the equator along with their pair. This is why they form two lines. Very important question. Double metaphase plate. They don't align in a single plane. Like in the case of metaphase of mitosis, all the chromosomes came and aligned in a single line. But here they are aligning in a double line. It is called double metaphase plate. So here notice that they are getting, the pairs are getting separated. Say for example, this is A and this is A dash, this is B, this is B dash. Sadly, A is getting pulled away from A dash, B is getting pulled away from B dash. Centromere is not splitting. When they are getting pulled away, you can see that they have two chromatids attached. Very much you can see two chromatids. But in mitosis we saw during anaphase, I had told you that if this is the chromosome, what splits? The centromere splits like this, and when the centromere splits, I had told you the P and the Q arm, the one of the sister chromatids get pulled apart from the other sister chromatids, that is P dash and Q dash. But here there is no splitting of chromatid, there is only separation. A gets separated from A dash, B gets separated from B dash. This is referred to as segregation. Okay, so this is what is segregation that happens during anaphase, and then they move towards the opposite poles, and then cytokinesis takes place. We end up with two daughter cells which have haploid number of chromosomes. If you see the mother cell, there were 4 chromosomes in it, but now the daughter cell has only 2 chromosomes per cell. So we say that the cell from diploid has become haploid. This is not the end, because each of these cells will now undergo meiosis 2. So we got daughter cell 1, daughter cell 2. We'll write it as haploid is equal to 2, haploid is equal to 2, because they have only 2 chromosomes, but their mother cell from which they started division, it had 4 cells, 2n is equal to 4. So they have become haploid. Now meiosis 2 is exactly like mitosis, except that there is no duplication of chromosomes. See, during metaphase 2, they are aligning at the equator, double line or single line? Single line. During anaphase 2, the centromere is splitting. When they are aligned at the equator, see here all of you, the centromere is splitting. When the centromere splits, these two sister chromatids get pulled up, and these two sister chromatids get pulled above. This is exactly like what we saw in case of anaphase of mitosis. And finally, this cell during the telophase 2 will undergo cytokinesis. This cell will undergo cytokinesis, and we end up with a set of 4 daughter cells. And notice all the 4 daughter cells have n is equal to 2. In these daughter cells, it was n is equal to 2, but each chromosome had its duplicate chromatid still. They had 2 chromatids, but now notice each chromosome has only 1 chromatid, that is P arm and Q arm. Clear? So a very quick and a rapid explanation. I hope it helped you to recall all the basics. At least this should stimulate you to open your textbooks and your reference books, and if you did not follow whatever words I have used in the explanation, it should be a trigger to you to go back to your books and spend some time with them. Okay, so this completes this synopsis part, which includes both biomolecules and cell cycle. So thank you all of you.